I always thought karma had a sense of humor. But it turns out, it's got a taste for irony too. It started with something so small I almost missed it. A half-second hesitation, a nervous glance, a text message she swiped away too fast. Most men would have ignored it. Most men want to ignore it. They convince themselves they're imagining things because the truth is too ugly to face. But I'm not most men. So, I started watching. Not the desperate, paranoid kind of watching. No pleading, no accusations, no begging for answers I already knew. Just quiet, patient observation. The way a hunter watches his prey. At first, there was nothing obvious. She still kissed me goodbye every morning. Still sent texts about her day. Still called me babe, in that same syrupy tone. But the details started shifting. She'd leave the house an hour earlier than she used to. Her gym sessions became mysteriously longer. The way she held her phone changed, always angling the screen away from me, always setting it face down like a gambler protecting his last hand. And then came the slip. It was a Friday night, and I was supposed to be working late. She didn't know I had wrapped up early. I walked in through the front door, expecting to surprise her with takeout, maybe a movie. Instead, I heard her voice, soft, playful, dripping with a tone she hadn't used with me in a long time. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Yeah, I miss you too. She didn't hear me step closer. She didn't see me standing there, watching, listening. And then she laughed. A short, breathless giggle, the kind I hadn't heard in years. I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because, in that moment, I knew exactly what was happening. And exactly what I was going to do about it. See, most guys lose their minds when they catch their wife cheating. They yell, they scream, they demand explanations like it'll somehow make a difference. But I'm not wired that way. Rage is a luxury for fools who don't know how to play the long game. I didn't confront her. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I walked in like nothing had happened, kissed her on the forehead, and handed her the takeout bag. She looked up at me, startled, wide-eyed like a deer in headlights. I just smiled. Hey, babe. Hope you're hungry. That was the moment she should have realized something was off. But she didn't. Because cheaters never expect the quiet ones to be dangerous. That night, as she lay beside me, oblivious, I was already planning. Not some cheap, emotional outburst. No, she didn't deserve the luxury of guilt. She deserved something far worse. See, my wife had always wanted a baby. Talked about it constantly. It'll bring us closer. It'll make our love stronger. Ironic, really, considering how much love she was sharing with someone else. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. Not a baby, of course, but the idea of one. The kind of idea that would turn her world upside down. I was going to make her believe she was pregnant. I was going to let her dream, let her hope, let her tell everyone about the miracle she thought was growing inside her. And then, when she was at her happiest, at her most vulnerable, I was going to take it all away. Because she didn't just cheat on me. She cheated on our future. And now, I was going to make sure she had no future left to hold on to. I rolled over in bed, listening to her breathing, so calm, so unaware of the storm that was about to hit. And for the first time since I heard that breathless little giggle, I finally felt at peace. If someone had asked me a year ago, I would have said my life was good. Not perfect, not the kind of fairy tale nonsense people post about online, but good, steady, solid. The kind of life that feels safe, like a house built on rock, not sand. Mornings were always the same. I'd wake up before her, not because I had to, but because I liked the quiet before the world started moving. I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and scroll through the news while the smell of fresh brew filled the kitchen. She'd come down a little later, wrapped in one of my shirts, yawning as she stretched her arms over her head like a cat. Morning, she'd mumble, stealing my mug before I could stop her. And I'd let her. Every time. It was those little things that made it feel real. The way she always had to drink from my cup instead of her own. The way she'd hum under her breath when she was making toast. The way she'd bump her knee against mine under the table without thinking. Just a small, unconscious touch that said, I know you're there. I love you. Weekends were predictable in the best way. Grocery runs where we'd argue over which snacks to buy. Lazy afternoons watching some show we'd never finish. Long drives with the windows down. Singing along to old songs we both pretended not to like. And the plans. Man, the plans. We should go to Italy next summer, she said once, lying on the couch with her head in my lap, tracing lazy circles on my arm. Rent a little villa, eat too much pasta, drink wine on the balcony. I remember laughing. And let you spend an entire trip making fun of my terrible Italian? No thanks. She had grinned up at me, her eyes bright with something I had mistaken for love. I'll teach you. Amore mio. That was the thing about her. She made the future feel like something real, something tangible. Like every plan we made would actually happen. But looking back, I see the cracks now. Like how she'd always be the one to suggest a future, but never be the one to take the first step to make it real. How she'd talk about wanting a baby, but always find a reason why now wasn't the right time. How she'd kiss me goodbye but hesitate just long enough that I should have noticed. Little things. Small hesitations. A slight shift in the way she held herself. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. That every relationship had its ups and downs, that a few off moments didn't mean anything. But now, I can't unsee it. The way she had already started pulling away. The way she had been choosing to share her future with someone else while making me believe I was still a part of it. It wasn't some sudden betrayal. It was slow, gradual, like a rope fraying one thread at a time until, one day, it just snaps. And the worst part? I never even felt it breaking. It started with something small. Something so insignificant that most men wouldn't have noticed. But I've always believed that deception lives in the details. She was late. Not the kind of late where she texts, "Traffic is bad, be home soon," or walks through the door, sighing about how her boss kept her past hours. No, this was different. Thursdays were predictable. She finished work at 6, was home by 6:30, and we had dinner together. It was our routine, something we never even had to think about. That night, 6:30 passed. Then 7. 7:30. No text. No call. At 7:45, my phone vibrated. A message. Simple. Too simple. Sorry, got caught up at work. Just getting home now. Love you. I read it twice. Something about it felt off. Normally, she would have said more. She would have complained about her boss, asked if I had started dinner, maybe even sent a voice message with an exaggerated groan about how exhausted she was. But this? It was short, flat, lacking the small details that made her messages hers. I put my phone down, staring at the screen. Maybe I was overthinking it. People had long days. People got tired. But something in my gut told me it wasn't just that. And then I realized something else. She said she just got home, but I hadn't heard the usual background noise. No sound of keys, no door opening, no rustling of bags. Just silence. I brushed it off, told myself it didn't mean anything. But the feeling didn't go away. A week later, it happened again. Another late night. Another vague message. Another excuse that felt practiced. That's when I started paying attention. Not obsessively. Not in a desperate, jealous way. Just watching. The way her phone was always face down now, even when it wasn't buzzing. The way she carried it everywhere, even into the bathroom, something she never used to do. The way she checked her messages and smiled, not her usual, easy smile, but a smaller, more private one. I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. Because if she was hiding something, she would already have a rehearsed answer. That's how liars work. They prepare. They stay ahead of the truth. So I stayed quiet. Because lies only work when the person being lied to wants to believe them. And I had just stopped believing. I had stopped believing in coincidences. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses to tell myself that I was imagining things. She was lying to me. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I didn't need them. The pattern was there, clear as day. And if she thought she could outplay me, she was sorely mistaken. I didn't confront her. Confrontation is what people expect when they get caught. They brace for it, prepare their alibis, their gaslighting, their fake tears. No, I wasn't going to give her that luxury. Instead, I did what she least expected. I watched, I listened, and I waited. The first thing I noticed was the passwords. She had never been secretive before. Her phone used to sit on the counter, unlocked, open, just another object in the house. But now? Now, she changed her passcode. A small thing, but an undeniable shift. People don't change their passwords unless they have something to hide. Then there was her laptop. She used to leave it open, tabs full of shopping carts, half-finished work documents, random YouTube videos she forgot to close. Now, every time she stepped away, she shut it. Not just put it to sleep, fully shut it down. The first time, I told myself it was a fluke. The second time, a coincidence. By the third, I knew. She was careful. She was smart. But she wasn't perfect. The next red flag came when I casually asked about her work schedule. I wasn't obvious, just an offhand comment about whether she'd be home late again. She hesitated for half a second before answering. I might have missed it if I wasn't watching so closely. That hesitation was a calculation. A mental check. What did I tell him last time? What would sound believable? That was when I decided to test her. I told her I had a business trip. Nothing too long. Just 2 nights away for a conference. I made sure to mention it weeks in advance. Let her get comfortable with the idea. I watched her face as I told her. She nodded, smiled, told me she'd miss me. But there was something else beneath the surface. Not relief exactly, but a shift. A subtle anticipation. She wasn't upset about me leaving. She was waiting for it. So I gave her what she wanted. I packed my bags. I kissed her goodbye at the door. I got in my car, drove 3 blocks away, and parked. And then, I waited. She lasted less than an hour. The moment she thought I was gone, she changed. The careful, distant wife disappeared, and something else took her place. She was smiling at her phone, fingers moving fast over the screen. I couldn't see what she was typing, but I didn't need to. Then she got ready. Not the way she did for work. Not the way she did for a normal night out. This was different. This was deliberate. A little extra time on her makeup, a different perfume than the one she usually wore around me. A dress I hadn't seen in months. One she used to wear when we went on dates, back when she still wanted to impress me. Then she left. She thought she was being careful, but she had no idea just how closely I was watching. I followed, keeping my distance, letting her think she was free. She wasn't going to the office. She wasn't meeting a friend. She drove across town, parked outside a building I didn't recognize, and walked inside like she belonged there. I stayed outside, waiting, watching, and when she finally walked out, hours later, her hair slightly messy, her lipstick slightly faded, her phone clutched too tightly in her hand, I knew. She had made her choice. Now, it was my turn to make mine. I had suspected it. I had tracked every lie, every shift in her behavior, every excuse that didn't add up. But there's a difference between knowing and seeing, between suspicion and undeniable, brutal truth. And the truth has a way of cutting deeper than anything else. She thought she was careful. She thought she was smart. She thought she could outmaneuver me. But liars always slip up. And she had just made her first real mistake. It came in the form of a receipt. A small, flimsy piece of paper she had carelessly left tucked inside her purse. A receipt from a restaurant I had never been to. From a night she had told me she was working late. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of wine. A timestamp that lined up perfectly with the hours she had been exhausted from a long shift. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling something inside me shift. Not shock. I had moved past that stage weeks ago. Not heartbreak. That required love, and whatever I had felt for her had been steadily replaced with something much colder. No, what I felt was something sharper. Calculating. Like the final puzzle piece clicking into place. But I wasn't done. I needed more. The next slip came 2 days later. She left her laptop open for exactly 13 seconds while she went to the kitchen for water. 13 seconds was all I needed. I didn't touch anything. I didn't snoop through her files. I just let my eyes scan the screen, the glowing blue bubble of an open chat window, the half-typed response she had been about to send. A name I didn't recognize, but one I wouldn't forget. And a message that was simple, damning, infuriating. I miss you too. Can't wait for tomorrow. There was no way to twist that into something innocent. No work-related excuse. No misunderstanding. No way she could talk her way out of it. And still I waited. Because liars don't just lie once. They lie constantly. They lie to cover old lies, to reinforce new ones, to protect themselves from the consequences they know are coming. And the best way to destroy a liar isn't to accuse them. It's to let them dig their own grave. So I let her. I let her kiss me goodbye in the morning. I let her tell me she loved me. I let her send those fake little texts about her day. And all the while I was planning. Because she thought she was in control. She had no idea that I had just taken it back. I had everything I needed. Proof of her betrayal, a name, a pattern. I could have confronted her right then and there, thrown the receipt on the table, demanded answers. But that would have been her game, chaotic, emotional, reactionary. I wasn't playing her game. I was playing mine. And in my game, I didn't just expose the betrayal. I made sure the fall was long, painful, and utterly irreversible. She had always wanted a baby. Talked about it constantly. It'll bring us closer. It'll make our love stronger. Ironic, considering how much love she had been sharing with someone else. I had ignored it before, brushed off her enthusiasm as something we would do when the time was right. But now, that desire of hers, that deep emotional need, that was where I would strike. So I became the perfect husband. The kind of man a woman would never suspect was plotting her downfall. I was attentive, loving, present. I let her believe I was oblivious, that her little lies were working, that I still saw her as my devoted wife. And then, one evening, over a quiet dinner, I laid the foundation. I told her I had been thinking, that maybe she was right, that maybe it was time to start a family. The excitement in her eyes was immediate, electric. She reached for my hand, squeezed it, told me how happy she was. And I just smiled. Because in that moment, I had already won. It started small. A subtle shift in routine. I suggested we prepare, that we be responsible about it. Vitamins, healthier meals, light exercise, things that made her feel like she was actively working towards something. She followed along eagerly, completely unaware that I was laying a different kind of groundwork. The psychological kind. The kind that makes a person believe in something that doesn't exist. Then came the symptoms. It wasn't hard to introduce them. A casual mention that she looked a little pale. A question about whether she had been feeling more tired lately. You've been eating less, haven't you? Maybe your hormones are shifting. She started noticing it herself. The mind is a powerful thing. If you plant the right seed, it will grow all on its own. Then, one morning, she woke up and said the words I had been waiting for. I think I might be pregnant. I was perfect. Supportive, excited, playing the role of the loving husband with absolute precision. I encouraged her to take a test, but when it came back negative, I planted doubt instead of disappointment. Maybe it's just too early. Maybe the test was faulty. She wanted to believe it so badly that she clung to every excuse I gave her. And so, the cycle continued. She started talking about baby names, about nursery colors. She told her friends, her mother, her sister. She glowed with anticipation, completely unaware that I had built this illusion just to shatter it. Then, when I knew she was at the peak of her excitement, when she was already picturing the life she thought we were about to have, I struck. I casually mentioned that we should confirm things with a doctor, that it was time to be sure. She agreed instantly, no hesitation. And so, I made the appointment. I watched as she walked into that clinic, as she practically floated with hope, as she believed she was about to have the happiest moment of her life. And then, I watched as she came out. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, her eyes darting in every direction as if she couldn't comprehend what had just happened. I waited until she saw me, until our eyes locked. Then, I tilted my head slightly, just enough for her to see it, the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. That was the moment she knew. The moment she realized that she hadn't just lost a future, she had lost control. Because now, everyone knew. Her friends, her family, his family. Everyone had heard her talk about the baby that never was. Everyone had shared in her excitement. And now, everyone would be asking questions. And I simply walked away. Because my work was done. And her suffering had only just begun. The beauty of a well-executed plan is that, by the time the target realizes what's happening, it's already too late. I had spent weeks constructing the perfect illusion, leading her deeper into her own delusion, making her believe in something that never existed. And now, it was time to watch it all collapse. She was already shaken from the doctor's appointment. The look on her face when she walked out of that clinic, the way her fingers trembled as she clutched her purse, the silent, panicked way she looked at me as if searching for some explanation, she knew. She knew that something was very, very wrong. But what she didn't know was just how far I had planned this. I let her sit with it for a few days. Let her feel the weight of the lie she had unknowingly carried. She withdrew into herself, barely speaking, barely meeting my eyes. And then, right when she was at her weakest, I made my move. It started with an announcement. A casual, cheerful statement over dinner, made in the presence of friends and family. Since we've been trying, I thought it would be a great idea to host a little gathering this weekend. A celebration of the future. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. She couldn't argue, couldn't contradict me, not in front of everyone. They were already nodding, excited, congratulating us. She forced a smile, but I saw the way her fingers dug into her napkin, the barely concealed panic behind her eyes. She knew she wasn't pregnant. But they didn't. The next few days were a blur of preparations. I made sure everything was perfect, the decorations, the invitations, even the subtle touches that made it all feel real. She didn't try to stop me. She was too busy spiraling, too busy trapped in her own mind, wondering how to escape the web she had unknowingly walked into. And then, the night arrived. Friends, family, Colleagues all gathered in our home, dressed for celebration, laughter in the air, glasses raised in toasts. She was stiff, her smile forced, her hands cold as she clutched her drink. I could feel the weight pressing down on her, the knowledge that there was no way out. Then, when the moment was right, I stepped forward and raised my glass. The room quieted, expectant eyes turning toward me. "Tonight is special," I began, my voice steady, confident. "Not just for us, but for the new life we thought we were bringing into this world. A new chapter. A fresh start." But I paused, letting my gaze slowly settle on her, watching as the color drained from her face. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Confused glances, whispers. She swallowed hard, her grip tightening on her glass. I took my time, letting the tension build, letting her feel the walls closing in. "You see," I continued, my voice calm, almost amused, "we've all been so excited, so invested. But there's just one little problem. There is no baby." The silence that followed was deafening. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat bobbed as she struggled to breathe, as the weight of the moment crashed down on her. Every eye in the room was on her now, questioning, doubting, judging. I let it sit. Let her feel it. And then, with the faintest hint of a smirk, I delivered the final blow. "But don't worry," I said, my voice dropping just slightly, "because it turns out, my dear wife has been creating new life in other ways." Gasps. More whispers. And then, the final touch, the evidence. The receipt. The messages. The name of the man she had thought she could keep hidden. She didn't move. Couldn't move. And then, just as she started to break, just as the whispers turned into a suffocating roar around her, I did the one thing she never expected. I raised my glass again. "To new beginnings," I said smoothly, before taking a slow, deliberate sip. And with that, I turned and walked away. Because my work here was done. The silence after my toast was suffocating. A heavy, sinking weight that filled the entire room. I watched her, standing there, frozen in place, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if holding on to reality itself. Her eyes darted around, desperate, searching for someone, anyone who would come to her rescue. But no one did. Her mother's face had gone pale, her lips slightly parted in shock. Her friends, the same ones she had gushed to about the baby that never existed, were whispering among themselves, their expressions shifting from confusion to betrayal. Someone let out a quiet gasp as realization set in. Someone else muttered, "Is this a joke?" But it wasn't. She finally managed to speak, but her voice cracked on the first word. I don't understand." The lie was weak, frail, like a crumbling wall trying to hold back a flood. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, tilting my head slightly, waiting. I wanted to see her feel it, the helplessness, the humiliation, the raw, consuming panic of losing control. Her breathing turned shallow, rapid. She forced a nervous, trembling smile as if she could somehow charm her way out of this. There has to be some kind of mistake," she stammered. We should talk in private." That was the moment I stepped forward. Not aggressively, not angrily. Just calmly, deliberately, closing the space between us so she could see, up close, the absolute certainty in my eyes. And then, in a voice only she could hear, I said the words that ended her last shred of hope. "There is no mistake. And you know it." Her breath hitched. She looked around again, but the room had already turned against her. The whispers had grown louder, the stares sharper. Someone pulled out their phone, subtly recording, documenting the moment she realized she had nowhere left to run. Then came the inevitable. The desperate, pitiful attempt to rewrite reality. "Please, let's just talk, just us. You're overreacting. We can fix this." She reached for my hand. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Just let her fingers hover there in the space between us, trembling, before she finally understood. There was nothing left to fix. Then came the next stage, denial. "It wasn't what you think." I never meant," she cut herself off, realizing mid-sentence that there was no version of this story where she came out clean. Then, the tears. Her voice broke as her eyes glistened, as she tried to force a sob that sounded more like a plea than genuine grief. "Please, don't do this. I love you." I let the words hang in the air for a second before I exhaled, slow and measured. And then, with a quiet, almost amused tone, I responded, "No, you don't." That was it. The final crack. She shattered. Tears streamed down her face now, her shoulders shaking, her breathing ragged as she realized she wasn't just losing me, she was losing everything. Her friends, her family, her carefully curated reputation. Behind her, Her mother finally spoke. Is this true? Her voice was sharp, disappointed, the kind of tone a child hears when they know there's no escaping punishment. She turned, frantic, reaching for the one person who had always defended her, always stood by her side. Mom, please, it's not enough. The single word cut through the air like a blade. Her mother stepped back, shaking her head, disgusted. The room had officially turned. Someone let out an awkward cough. Someone else whispered, I can't believe this. More phones were out now, capturing every moment, every tear-streaked expression, every useless excuse she tried to throw into the void. She turned back to me, her last lifeline, but I had already picked up my glass again. I swirled the drink slowly, watching the liquid move, unfazed, untouched by the chaos unraveling around me. She opened her mouth, but I didn't need to hear whatever final defense she had prepared. I simply placed my drink down, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked away. I didn't need to say another word. The destruction was already complete. The aftermath was as satisfying as it was inevitable. She had spent so long weaving a lie, so long constructing an illusion of the perfect wife, the devoted partner, the woman everyone admired. And in a single night, it all unraveled. Word spread fast. That's the thing about social humiliation. Once the first domino falls, the rest come crashing down before you even have to lift a finger. Friends who used to adore her suddenly distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The same people who used to hang on to her every word now avoided her entirely, their conversations shifting the moment she entered a room. Her family was the first to collapse on her. Her mother, the one person she had always counted on to take her side, refused to speak to her. The shame was too great, the disgrace too public. I didn't need to say anything. Her mother saw the betrayal for herself, heard the excuses firsthand, and made her own judgment. From what I heard, the last conversation they had ended in shouting, with her mother telling her, "You did this to yourself." Then came her job. Her perfect, pristine image had been part of her professional success. She built her career on being well-liked, respected, admired. That doesn't work when people see you as a liar. Her coworkers whispered behind her back. Her boss, who had once seen her as an asset, suddenly saw her as a liability. No one wants to be associated with someone whose name is now a punchline in hushed conversations. Her work environment became unbearable, and soon enough, she was gone. Whether she quit or was pushed out didn't matter. What mattered was that she had lost yet another thing she thought was untouchable. And then, of course, there was him. The man she thought was worth throwing everything away for. He disappeared the moment things went public. No grand declarations of love, no desperate attempt to salvage their so-called relationship. As soon as her name became synonymous with disgrace, he walked away like she had never existed. No calls. No messages. No second chances. Because men like him never stay, they take what they want and vanish the moment it becomes inconvenient. I imagine she had thought he would be there to catch her when she fell. Instead, she hit the ground alone. As for me, I moved on. Effortlessly. Cleanly. I never looked back, never answered her calls, never gave her the closure she so desperately craved. She sent messages at first, pathetic, fragmented attempts at justification. Then apologies. Then outright pleading. I ignored them all. She didn't deserve a response. The best revenge isn't just taking everything away. It's thriving without them. I made sure she saw that. Photos of vacations, promotions, celebrations with friends who had sided with me. A new relationship, one that was effortless, genuine, built on trust instead of lies. She saw every glimpse of the life she threw away, and that, more than anything, was what destroyed her the most. I didn't have to ruin her. She did that all on her own. Some say revenge is pointless, that it's a waste of energy, that moving on is the real victory. But I disagree. Because revenge isn't about changing the past. It's about making sure they never forget it. She won't forget. She won't forget the way the room fell silent when I exposed her. The weight of the stares, the whispers that followed her long after the party ended. She won't forget how her mother looked at her, not with anger, but with disgust. How her friends, once so eager to hear about her perfect life, suddenly stopped answering her calls. She won't forget waking up the next morning, hoping it was just a nightmare, only to realize it was worse, because now, it was real. Now, it was her life that had been ruined. And the best part? I never had to raise my voice. Never had to beg for answers. Never had to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Because I didn't break. She did. Now, she lives in the wreckage of her own choices. Alone. Unwanted. Unforgiven. And no matter how much she wishes she could take it all back, the truth remains, she played herself. As for me, I moved on. Effortlessly, cleanly, and I made sure she saw every second of it. The trips, the celebrations, the new woman in my life who is everything she pretended to be. I never had to destroy her. I just let her destroy herself. So now, I have just one question for you. If you were in my place, if you had seen what I saw, known what I knew, would you have done the same? Or would you have gone even further?